So it is afternoon. I'm Melissa Zordita, the Executive Director of the Planning Commission, and I'm thrilled to welcome you all to our Info BBQ Brown Bag Quarterly. So hopefully you all brought your brown bags and will feel free to eat while we're doing that. Steve's actually got a brown bag. So that's awesome. If you haven't signed up, or if you don't get our newsletters that tells you about events like this, there is a sign-up sheet just outside the door where you can sign up for our newsletters that'll tell you about things happening with the Planning Commission, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, and the River Board. Today we're excited to welcome a popular state and national conference presenter and author on leadership and public service, Dr. Scott Paine. After more than 30 years in higher education, including 22 years at the University of Tampa, he joined the staff of the Florida League of Cities in 2015 as the Director of Leadership Development and Education. Scott's perspective on municipal government and public service has been informed by both his academic career and his political activities. He served 2 terms on City Council for City of Tampa, and in that capacity 8 years on the MPO, and 3 of that as the chair of the MPO. He's the author of More Than Self, Rethinking Public Leadership for the 21st Century. He writes a regular column for Quality Cities magazine and a blog, drscottpaine.com. And today's topic really is very timely, particularly in the political environment that we're all working in. And so, join me in welcoming Dr. Scott Paine.
Good afternoon. I realize the mic is mostly for posterity in the video camera, so I'll try to be sure I'm speaking loudly enough. Though I am not of Italian ancestry, I do tend to talk a lot with my hands, so Lynn, if I get the mic too far away, just remind me.
Okay, thank you.
So, good afternoon. I'm glad to have a chance to be here. I was saying to Melissa that it's been a long time since I've spent any time here. I used to spend a lot of time here back when I was on the MPO and then ultimately as the MPO board chair in the 90s. So it's kind of familiar, and yet at the same time it's not. I want to remind those who might have come in, I know Lynn was doing a good job of trying to prompt you to do this. I have a live poll up right now, and I would love to have you respond to this poll. Your responses to this poll are anonymous. I won't know who you are, and I won't share who you are with anybody. I will be asking, it's a request, at a certain point this afternoon, I'll be asking you to agree to take ownership of an opinion you expressed. You'll see why, and you'll see how that works in a little bit. But right now, if you haven't had a chance to do this, just go on to polev.com, use your phone, you can use your tablet, answer the 3 questions. You won't like the answer options if you're like most people, because this is the way pollsters do things. They ask you a really interesting question. Which one of these do you think is a better expression of your opinion? And then they give you 2 expressions, neither of which matches your opinion, and you're forced to choose. So I am a nasty public opinion pollster that way. You're picking one that best suits you. Like I said, we're going to see those results in aggregate in a little bit, and we'll talk about that. But that's a tool for something we're going to do in a few minutes. I want to start with a story about cooperation under difficult circumstances. So I spoke at the National League of Cities Conference in Los Angeles a couple weeks ago. So I got on a plane, Tampa, flew to LAX, and I was traveling alone, and the plane was full. Some of us dread that, some of us really look forward to that. I was on a recent flight that was essentially full, and this woman got on, and there were 2 men sitting in the window and the aisle seat. The middle seat was all that was left. And she didn't know them, and so she had to kind of negotiate how she was going to be in their presence. And she began a conversation which then would lasted the entire 8-hour flight.
Oh,
wow. An 8-hour conversation.
And she wasn't quiet, let's just so you never know what you're going to get. So when I sat down and I was joined by 2 women for this flight, people I didn't know, and Marilee, who was at the window, began a conversation, just talking about stuff that's going on, and we learned a little bit about each other's background and what we do, and it started, this could be a very pleasant conversation. And Beth was kind of in the middle, literally, and just kind of observing and occasionally asking questions. And then Marilee began to talk about sensitive political topics. So we talked about immigration. We talked about public safety and the concerns about, again, if you were doing these two issues, people who talk about concerns about the way police treat some people in our community, or concerns about the way police are being treated. These are sensitive topics. So I had a great opportunity to practice what I'm going to be talking about today, because I will just say that Marilee and I, it was pretty clear very early, did not agree on many of these issues. We had a wonderful 3.5-hour flight where we shared our perspectives, and I think each of us grew some from that conversation. And Beth's comment when it was over was, this was awesome. For us to be able to talk about things that are really important, but that people get really upset about, and not agree about everything, and still have a good conversation, and not wish we could jump out the window and 30,000 feet. This is a good trip. So I was saying to Lynn, what I'm about to talk about today is not something I have been talking about in this form until today. I have a magazine piece coming out on this is probably out now, on this same topic, but dealing with this idea of how we navigate the deep waters of our public conversation, because I think one thing we probably can agree about is that in some ways the body politic is quite sick. And we need skilled caregivers of the body politic to help us get better. And this is not about the points of view being expressed, it's about the way we are expressing those points of view. I want to also maybe lower the bar or lower the expectation before I get started and say, there's nothing I'm going to say that at some point in your life you haven't heard before, probably. Because there's been no revolution in psychology that's revealed to us how we can get along with people we disagree with. And there's nothing that we've learned about the inner workings of the mind that makes us treat each other with respect. What I'm going to offer you is a way of thinking about how we can engage in public conversations, drawing upon things you already know, but maybe having you think about them a little differently, so that we can navigate these and move from confrontation to cooperation, create some space to talk together. A little background for this, I want you to think for a moment about why people engage in public discourse. So it's at a public meeting, it's at a town hall, or it's at a party, but they start a conversation. It could have been around your Thanksgiving table, I don't know, about something where you know people don't agree, and you know this could get interesting. And I'm going to suggest that there are two fundamental reasons, if we dig deep, that we do it. One is for self. We're advancing ourselves. We're drawing attention to ourselves. We're getting to feel good about ourselves because we're very skilled debaters. Whatever it might be, it's about self. And when we do that, the behaviors that go with that, sometimes we're just venting. Maybe around your Thanksgiving table. I'll flip this the other way. So I'm a Roman Catholic deacon. That's just my background. I participated in a men's prayer group. We got together last night, and I was venting about the health insurance system in the United States because I'm about to lose coverage for one of the doctors that's very important to my family. And so I was venting. Okay, and that's okay. And in some context, we need to be able to just express ourselves. But in these public settings, sometimes the venting is all that it's about, and it can make it difficult for other people to deal with, especially if they don't share their opinion. Have you ever seen people score points? There's this place where this happens all the time. It's called Twitter.
Right?
That's true.
Right? And to a lesser extent, Facebook, but Facebook absolutely as well. Just Twitter is designed for this. It's the 140 characters, bam, get you. It's not an environment for healthy conversation. It doesn't really facilitate that, right? But in normal conversation, people do this too. They're looking for opportunities to one-up prove that they're smarter, more articulate, whatever. And so sometimes we engage in public discourse in order to score points. And part of that is that there's an audience. Somebody's watching, listening, reading, and so we are rising in their esteem. And I hate, when I'm training newly elected council members about this, I want them to understand that there are people who show up at their meetings to speak at their meetings, but they're not talking to the council. I mean, they are talking to the council, but they don't care about the council. That's not their audience. They're scoring points with the people who are watching on television who are their fans on Facebook. And that's all they care about. Score their points, they're doing great, right? Again, advancing the self. And there are those of us, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa, who always want to win. Which is a little different than scoring points. It's, at the end of this debate, I want to have crushed my opponent. I try not to do that, but certainly this is my greatest limitation as a public participant in debate. We're going to win this. And so every time a conversation begins about a policy issue, we're going to win this. Whether or not I actually have a good idea, whether or not I should win, I'm going to win because it's about me. It's about winning the argument. And I'm probably not the only person you've ever seen in public life who does have this tendency. And you can hear it when the debate begins to lose its coherence because it's no longer about the issue, it's about winning the battle, and you can hear it and kind of go, wait, put on the brakes, stop, do you realize what you're doing? Probably they don't, I didn't, but it's not about anything other than yourself. Now there's another primary reason that people engage in public conversation about public issues, and that's in some sense to advance the public good. That might be, I want to learn so I can be a more effective citizen. That might be, I want to share with other people so they can be a more effective citizen. It might be, we need to make a good decision, and so I want to participate in that. But in one way or another, the underlying motivation is the public good. And when that's true, one of the things we have to do is create space for honest conversation. Because we can't make good policy without knowing what people think and feel, without knowing their experiences, because policies affect people. And we do have this odd notion that what the people think and feel ought to have something to do with the policies we adopt. Not sure where that idea came from, but it's ours. So we actually have to have space for people to tell the truth as they experience it. That's one of the things that people who are focused on the public are going to do. They're also going to move toward creating participation. You know, in that first column, it's I'm going to dominate, or I'm going to score points, or it's about me. When it's about the public good, we're going to invite people to enter in. Here's what I'm thinking, what are you thinking? Or even better, what are you thinking before I tell you what I'm thinking? Draw them in because the public good depends upon public participation. And it's about discovery. I don't know what the right answer is. I may think it is, I know, but I'm willing to be convinced that I'm wrong. We're going to discover a way forward by listening, gathering information, processing, not fighting. So what I'm going to offer is a methodology for advancing the public good in public conversations. It has an acronym, because that helps us remember things. HADOC. And yes, that's a haddock. For those who know anything about fish, it's a cod, okay? It's just essentially the same kind of fish. But there's a reason that I ended up choosing this way of presenting it, because a haddock is a deep water fish. And the conversations we need can't stay in the shallows. We need to be willing to go deep if we're going to really make progress on these difficult subjects. So we're going to talk about these 5 ideas in this order because they're important in the way we engage. To hear, to accept, to depersonalize, to own, and to care. And I'll take one at a time. The first one, hear is an odd word for me to have chosen, and I admit that, because hearing, when people talk about hearing, they're talking about this, the physiological capacity to absorb sound waves and turn them into something in the brain. So we talk about someone being hard of hearing, that's different than saying they're hard-headed. Right? Hard of hearing means that this thing doesn't work well. It's a physical thing. So normally when we talk about hearing, we're talking about a physical thing. When we're talking about engaging people in conversation, we're talking about listening, right? And I don't want to dismiss that. That's correct. I'm just going to turn this on. Listening is an act, right? It's a conscious decision to take those sound waves and attend to them and make sense of them. Quick question, how many of you have successfully raised a teenager to adulthood, more or less? Congratulations, tell me how. How many of you are currently trying to achieve that awesome outcome? I feel your pain. But I didn't get everybody. So let me try this. How many of you were teenagers? Do you remember mom or dad speaking to you and your ears were working fine, but you weren't listening, right? And of course, what parents do is they say, do you hear me? And the correct answer is, yes. Are you listening to me? No. Because listening is a conscious act. Right? And we know that if we're going to improve our interpersonal relationships, we know if we're going to have constructive public dialogue, we need to listen. We need to make that conscious decision. But one can consciously decide to listen, to pay attention, and still not understand. It's not enough for us to listen. In fact, I was recently reading one author who was saying, you know, some of us are really, really good listeners. We are so good at listening, seriously, so good, that we will remember exactly what somebody just said. And we'll hold them to it. You said, no, I didn't mean that, but you said, because I was listening. I heard your words. And this author said, cut him some slack. You might have heard exactly what they said, but maybe it wasn't what they meant. Or maybe in light of some of the feedback they get, they wish they hadn't meant it and they'd like to get a mulligan. Can we do that? Can we let them? So it's not just about listening. You've got to go someplace farther. And so the someplace farther I'm talking about is to hear, in the sense of listen and really comprehend what the person wants us to understand so that we can say with honesty, I hear you. Right? Now, that expression means something in a lot of cultural settings. Right? So, I hear you. Someone's talking about their struggles with their teenagers. Oh, I hear you. I empathize. I identify. That makes more than sense to me. I get it here. And if you think about how many of our public conversations go awry, one of the first places they go awry is A, sometimes people aren't listening, but B, they're not striving to really hear. They're not striving to get to the place where that person who's speaking says things and we feel them, which is not the same thing as saying, you're right. It's just, oh, okay, yeah, I hear you. I can understand how it would feel that way. By the way, this is a great thing to try with a teenager. When they're going off on something, and you're going, you know, because you're a wise adult, you know that this is just great. But you remember being a teenager, and you remember how that could feel, or you've had an experience which is similar enough that you can hear that. And you, oh, yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, I know what that feels like. Or I can understand that that must be very hard for you. Or some kind of demonstration that we've actually got it. We hear. And just think of, from the beginning, if we just did that in these confrontations that occur over public matters, how quickly things would change. Because we would be coming to a place where we actually could feel what somebody else is saying. Get it, we hear it. So here's number one. The second one is really hard for some people, and that's to accept. And remember, acceptance is not the same thing as agreement. It's acceptance. But just admit to people who always tell the truth. Anybody want to argue with me about that? And I know in my life as a public servant, and I know working with public servants, that one of the concerns of people who are decision makers in public life is this person's testifying before us and they're lying. Or this person's coming to talk to us about some idea and they're lying. They're not telling the truth. Well, and they may be lying. Okay. There is something we know. There's a truth we know whenever someone speaks to us. They said this. Doesn't mean that anything they said was true, but what's true is they said it. Can we just accept that that's their testimony? Doesn't mean it's true, doesn't mean we get it the weight of 100% fact, it's just, okay, they came forward and they said this. And some of us want to argue with people's testimony and basically tell people, you can't feel that way. You can't think that. They can. They do. Can we just accept it's what they said? This is how journalists stay out of trouble, right? This is what I know some of us get frustrated with some of our friends in the media because they'll write this story and there'll be this statement about something and it's just outrageous and on the evidence so clearly false. How could they publish that? And how can they get away with that? And especially if it's about you. I mean, that really hurts. But you can't typically sue a skilled journalist for libel for a very simple reason. Because whatever that outrageous thing they published about you or the policy or whatever it was bracketed in quotation marks and was sourced. Sam Smith said, blah, 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 blah. And you know what's true? Sam Smith said it. And so it's not libel, even if it's damaging. Right? Okay, so for us, in this public discourse, there's that, okay, I've got to get to a place where I can hear you. I get it. I get what you're talking about. And if I think you're wrong, okay, you're wrong. But this is still your point of view. And if I think you're playing games, well, maybe you're playing games, but this is still what you're doing. And I'm just going to accept that this is how you're participating. Gives people space. They can do what they need to do. Third one's depersonalize. Now, I think probably everybody in the room, whether you know the Latin or not, know that it's inappropriate to do ad hominem attacks. In logic and argumentation and rhetoric, the idea that instead of attacking the argument, you attack the person making the argument, as though that somehow does anything to the argument being made. It doesn't. And talk about what happens on Twitter all the time, and in candidate debates all the time, and in a variety of other settings where public individuals speak to other public individuals, or citizens speak to each other, that we go from discussing the subject to discussing the people who are discussing the subject. And that's just illegitimate. I mean, we've known this for a very long time, but this is not a valid approach to effective argumentation, to reaching logical conclusions. We know that. We're not being logical. So don't do this. That's easy. I want to take this idea further, which is why I talk about depersonalization. We should not assign ownership to ideas we need to refute. So here's what I have in mind. You're having a conversation with your significant other, and they propose something, and you're thinking, that's just stupid. Your idea is stupid. Okay, well, stupid's probably not the best word to use anyway. So you say, your idea is not intelligent. I don't know what better. Your idea is not going to work. Okay, all right, maybe that idea is not going to work, but why do I have to preface it with your? Because that's irrelevant, isn't it? The question on the table is, my significant other has suggested we do something. It's either a good idea or a bad idea, or we don't know. The fact that my significant other proposed it is irrelevant to the merit of the idea. So, the idea that we could put solar panels on our roof right now, I like the idea, except for the fact that we're going to be replacing the roof in 6 months. not your idea. Do you hear the difference? And as soon as we put a pronoun on it or a name, the Republican proposal, the Democratic proposal, the Trump proposal, the Obama proposal, you hear what happens? We're going to rise up to the barricades depending on which side we're on. But what matters is the idea, doesn't it? And not who proposed it. There's this story in the Old Testament about a prophet named Balaam who is bribed into doing something God doesn't want him to do. On his way, riding his donkey to go do this thing that God does not want him to do, the donkey refuses. The donkey at some point just stops and will go no farther. And Scripture tells us that Balaam is very upset about this because he's going to make a lot of money on this deal, and the donkey's not going, so he's cursing the donkey, and he's kicking the donkey, he's beating the donkey, and the donkey finally crawls off in the ditch. It's just trying to hide, and Balaam's beating away at this donkey and cursing this donkey, and the donkey looks up at him and says, "Master, why are you beating me? I'm only trying to save your life." And at that moment, just down the road is revealed an angel of God with a sword in his hand who was going to kill Balaam to prevent him from doing what God did not want him to do. Moral of the story, even a jackass is right from time to time. Why do we care whose idea it is? Why do we insist on labeling it? Can't we just deal with the idea? So, depersonalize. Critique the idea. Praise its virtues, question its merits, do what's appropriate for the idea, and don't label it. Don't label it to a particular individual, don't label it to a particular group. I'm not suggesting you shouldn't be aware of sources when you're talking about evidence. Notice that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about ideas. You know? If the idea has merit, it has merit. Doesn't matter where it comes from. With me?
Yeah.
Okay, so here, accept, depersonalize. And that's all been pretty much about dealing with the other person up to this point. So now we switch to ourselves. And I'm going to suggest something that's almost the opposite of what I just said about how we deal with other people. Take ownership. Have you ever used that phrase? The truth is? You're having a conversation with someone, and they say, well, whatever they're going to say about something. They say this and say, well, yeah, people say that, but the truth is, or some variation of that statement. The truth is, we don't know the truth about much of anything. I want you to think about this, okay? We don't know the truth. Absolute certainty, this is the truth. About much. Which doesn't mean we don't have high confidence about many things, but absolute truth. And if we have high confidence, could we be wrong? Yes, not likely, but we could be. And when we claim that we know the truth, we're denying that we could be wrong. Which means we create no space for the person who disagrees with us to do so respectfully. They're either an idiot, or they have an ill intention, a suspicious agenda, which is why they're dealing in falsehoods. Because we've got the truth. How about owning our statements? To me, that proposal lacks efficiency. To me, the idea that we would be able to raise the revenue to do this in this way raises real questions for me about whether or not, in fact, that much revenue would be available. Notice I used my pronoun twice in that one. I recently read a study which says, not that's the truth, it says, I recently read a study. And someone would say, oh, interesting. I recently read a study. And now we can compare studies. I've been thinking about this, and I wonder if, I hadn't thought about that, but I can wonder if that too. But if you tell me you're disagreeing with me and you have the truth, I've got no room to maneuver. And if we're trying to create space for conversation, declaring that we have the truth ends it. There's no conversation left. You're either a truth teller like me, or you're a liar. So don't claim what, in truth, perhaps we don't really have. I've seen a lot of studies. Every study I've read, but notice what that does allow. That maybe there's a study I didn't read, yet there undoubtedly was. With me? And then what drives this whole train is the last one, caring. If we approach public debates as fights to be won, then we don't care about the other people. We don't really care about the outcome. We just care about a one in the win column. And that doesn't get us anywhere, and we can see that every day. You don't need to look very far. News, in the halls of Congress especially, it's just fighting. It's just who's going to win this round. And we're not solving problems that way. People use their statements to score points personally, score points for their side, to do harm for the people. It's a game. I mean, and it is, in fairness, a certain amount of participation in the political world is a game for people. And that's not to condemn what they do. It's to say some people like football, and some people like baseball, and some people like public debate. It's a sport. There are rules. And maybe we need to encourage people to play by those rules. But for those of us who are seeking something outside the game, who are seeking not to win or lose or score points, but to actually advance the public conversation, we need to care about the public. More than we care about our party, more than we care about our favorite elected officials, more than we care about our idea that's on the agenda, more than we care about anything. Both the public as a whole and each individual member of the public. So, a little true confession, when I was on council in the early years, and I won't say that this problem is completely resolved, but there was a period of time when AAA, as a national organization, in its lobbying efforts, was actively anti-transit. Every highway dollar, every dollar in the trust fund should be going to highways. They were even anti what we would call today complete streets. I mean, really it was about asphalt for cars at one point. And given my opinions about where we ought to be going in transportation, that bothered me. That really irritated me. And it just so happened that AAA has an office in West Shore, and there was a rezoning taking place, or a new building, and AAA was involved in the process. And so one of their people representing their land development component was speaking before council, and I took that opportunity to let him know what I thought about AAA's perspective on this issue. In very pointed, not personal, but pretty aggressive terms. And I could do it because I was the councilman. And he couldn't fight back. And he didn't. They were back in front of us some weeks later, and I apologized. Because I had been more concerned about my agenda than about the man who was standing in front of me. And I had been disrespectful. Because this wasn't his policy. Because he wasn't even there representing that part of AAA. He had a completely different role. And I made him personally responsible for everything I didn't like. The public as a whole, but also each and every individual. We're called, if we want to expand the public conversation, to actually care. And the greatest way to practice that is to think about the most difficult person you have to deal with. In your office, in the public, an elected official, whoever it might be, and say, I'm going to care what happens to them. I'm going to strive to hear them. I'm going to accept that their point of view is their point of view, even though it drives me crazy. And when I'm dealing with something they've said, I'm going to depersonalize and talk about what's been said rather than speaking about them. If you can do it with that one, then you can do it with anyone. And then you can teach me how. Okay, so you get this idea, right? We have, and I think everything I've said, in some way you've heard this before, but maybe not quite this way. Maybe not quite put this together exactly this way. The only way we're going to create some improvement in public dialogue, to create shared mental space, is if we come up with a method that we can then follow and practice. So, you're going to get a chance to practice. Here's what we're going to do. So we had those poll questions, right? What I'm going to show you now are the poll results. Again, this is just aggregate results. Just so you might be interested to know what's the lay of the land in this room, right? So the question on immigration, which of the following statements better describes your view of the immigrant caravans? They are desperate people fleeing violence or in need of our compassionate assistance. They're dangerous lawbreakers who pose a threat to our national security. Okay, so most of you are an A answer as opposed to a B answer. Okay. But there are at least a couple or three people in the room by the B answer. You're not alone. Which of the following best describes your view of the best way to prevent future school shootings? Make it more dangerous for the would-be shooter to enter public school, or armed security, possibly arming qualified teachers. We should make it more difficult for would-be shooter to pose a threat by stricter controls on guns and large-cast magazines. And so there's a common percentage there. It's within 4 percentage points. Okay. And then, which of the following statements best describes your view of the implications of Mueller probe? This was just for fun, or anything else. The Mueller probe will cause a constitutional crisis, or President Trump will do so in 86, 82, 87. Okay, so one could say that in aggregate, this room is probably rather blue. That's not a comment about clothes wearing. That's okay. Here's what I want to invite all of us to do. I'm going to pick, well, let's do this one. I'm going to pick the one on school shootings. And here's what I'm going to ask that we do. I want to divide the group into two relatively even group sizes. That's difficult because the distribution of opinion is nowhere near even. Some of you may be very committed to your point of view. Some of you may be less so. Or some of you may be willing to try on the other perspective, to try the other side and make the point. What I'd like to do is to divide the room in half, more or less, with about 50% of the people taking the point of view that we need to harden the target at the school, and 50% of people willing to take the view of we need to deal with gun control. Those two options that are on the table. Okay? Because then what we're going to do is we're going to have a chance to practice having a conversation about this issue in small groups. Do you understand my request? So in order to make this work, some of you are going to need to be willing to take the side that you didn't take. Particularly, some of you who said we need to deal with gun control, that's what we should do, need to be able to identify with the other side and take that side. Question?
Yes. So one of the questions I have, which is sometimes where public discourse devolves, is that we tend to put things in bipolar camps. Not all things are mutually exclusive, and
Correct.
that's where it gets very frustrating, where liberals think, Republicans, I can be a Republican who wants smart,
Yes.
well, sorry.
I understand.
Common sense kind of.
No, exactly right.
Yeah.
But that's why I made the comment on the front end about the nasty public opinion pollster, because we give you two choices.
Right.
I always give you two choices. It's like, more in these kinds of questions, it's like no, or yes to both, or kind of, or what about the third alternative? So you're right. And if you are someone who can look at this issue and say, well, I feel this way, but I also have concerns that way, and if you are in the majority for this question, you're the kind of person that would be appropriate to move into the other side for the conversation. The key is I don't want to have people be alone. Because what I'm going to do, show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to divide us into two groups. I'm going to gather around tables or maybe just a group of chairs. With the idea being there are a couple or three people at the table on taking the A answer and a couple or three people taking the B answer. Two of the people on each side will be actually talking to each other together, the four of them. The other two are observing. Everyone is, one hopes, trying to practice HADOC. And so after a few minutes of conversation, the observers who've not been participating will be invited to make observations, to speak about examples of someone demonstrating that they were striving to hear. Examples of depersonalization or an opportunity to depersonalize that was missed. So that, because we don't learn how to do something if someone isn't looking over our shoulder a little bit till we get it. And we don't do a good job of that, we're in the middle of it. So understand the task? So there's actually kind of the advantage of if you get to go to whichever side you choose to go to, and we kind of get divided in half, then it doesn't matter what your actual opinion is, we're going to have a conversation. But it'll also be helpful because we know that there is some difference in opinion about this. We'll see where it goes. Are you willing to try this? So let's make this the A side. We're just literally going to line up back like you did in elementary school and count off by 3. So the A side of the room is over here for the moment, the B side of the room is over here for the moment, and just try to even us out as best you can. Just move there if you would, and then we're going to count off and send back tables. Okay? So A side of the room, I'll go back to that question. A side of the room, B side of the room, let's see what we can do about dividing up. Okay?
There's some parts of the world that probably.
And I apologize for not having as much time as you could benefit from. Let me, because I know I need to get you back. Let me do this. Conversations that are required. So let me just ask for a couple of either observations about the experience, if there, and I'm very serious about what I'm about to say. I am interested in your experience, which includes I didn't see this many difference at all. Or this was particularly challenging, or the thing I kept catching myself doing was, or whatever. So because I'm serious as I think you are, part right you're here, how do we improve our public dialogue? And we're not going to get everybody to change what they're doing. We need to make some of us more skilled at making it possible for us to have that conversation. So I'm generally interested in whatever your experience was, something you might want to share. And I know for recording purposes, you probably want mic on, and that's just also, so please don't identify people with opinions. The point here is saying, this experience of, or struggling with the idea of depersonalizing, or that's kind of the feedback we're looking for, and I can get a mic over to you off. So anybody would like to share something about this abbreviated experience?
Well, in our group, it seems it's a whole lot easier when there's not one person that's really, really passionate on opposite ends. Our group was more moderate, so it was a lot more genteel than in other environments.
Yep. Right, so sometimes we get lucky. Everybody in the room wants to have a good conversation, and that makes it a little harder to know whether we're gaining skill set. You wanted to say something too, right, Jim?
Well, my observation was to depersonalize. We have some different opinions about the topic, and not to point out that what you said is totally incorrect. What my opinion is right, and that's the way we should do it. It was depersonalizing and just listening and opening up the conversation to hear what people were saying.
And did it make sense to you and to others, the idea that you depersonalize what others are saying, but in a sense personalize? You take ownership of what you are saying. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
And did that feel a little different?
Yeah.
I think what popped out to me a little bit is that we do see the Twitters and the news and everything blaring like you must hate children if you don't want gun control. You must hate old people if this. You must hate, but in reality, most people really are somewhere in the middle, 75%, 60%, 50%. And when they started to talk, they were coming together more than going apart because they opened their minds to actually hearing and not just being polarized, because we're not all condemning each other, but other people are trying to do that. So
I've had the privilege, the painful privilege of having some interaction with folks who were present at Marjory Stoneman Douglas and working with them and talking with them. So from the standpoint of this process, getting to a place where whatever one's opinion is, if your child was one of those children whose life was lost, or they survived, but now they're tremendously scarred by this experience, many of them are. And that person is going to be passionate, and that person may be very clear about what the right answer is, and I might not agree with the right answer, but can I get to a place where I hear their pain and where they're coming from, and care about that, and then depersonalize so I can critique an idea without critiquing them, and owning my own experience. And so I think sometimes when we are forced into a situation where we hopefully are willing to let someone share a very personal story, it helps us understand where they're coming from. And if we can depersonalize that conversation, we haven't discredited that story.
Mine's a bit more of a question, because in the groups, everybody was trying to do this at the same time. So what are some techniques when you're trying to do this, but the other person is personalizing it, not hearing, that sort of thing?
Can we come back to Karen? So, okay, you're really upset, you're really angry, you're really passionate about this, and okay, I'm going to care about you, which means I'm going to redouble my effort to hear. And I'll leave you with this, and I've got two quick quotes to let you go, but those of us who serve the public, if we are public-facing in our role at any time, odds are, at some point, we're going to be accused of the worst atrocities in all of human history, one way or another. It just happens, in bizarre ways. I remember an MPO meeting where a mother told me that the blood of her children were going to be on my hands because the map showed a 4-lane widening road. I learned this when my wife and I were being trained to adopt children from the foster care system. And if I can leave you with one other acronym, and some of you will know it, and many of you will not, I think, I will do that. Because many people go into the idea of adopting, especially from the foster care system, with the idea, I'm going to rescue these kids, they've had this miserable life, I'm going to give them such a great, better life, and they're going to wake up every morning and go, thank you, Mommy, thank you, Daddy, for rescuing me from a life of abuse and poverty. No. That is not at all how it works, for all kinds of perfectly reasonable reasons. These children will very often take all their pain and anger and loss out in forms of anger and belligerence toward the parents, especially the moms, who have adopted them. It's brutal. And so we learned the acronym QTIP. Does anybody know what it stands for?
Quit taking it personally.
Quit taking it personally, right? It's because that behavior by that child is not about you. It's about that child's pain. That behavior by that citizen is not about you. It's about their fear. It's about their anger. It's about, sometimes, I know in my public life, there were times when people got really angry with us about things that seemed to make no sense, and then come to find out their mother just died. And so their emotional level was not about the issue. It was about the grief or something else, but this was a place where it came out, and it could, safely, because we weren't going to beat them up or lock them up. So that's right. And let me illustrate that idea. There's a story told of the Buddha. Walking through rural India, he enters this small village. There's one little street in the village, and there's a very angry man in the village. A very angry man. And the very angry man walks out in the middle of the street and confronts the Buddha and starts just cursing at him and swearing at him and yelling at him. And he's loud, and it's a small village. So this crowd begins to gather around this confrontation, one-sided, with this angry man yelling at the Buddha. And the Buddha just stands and listens. And eventually the man stops, runs out of air. And the Buddha says, may I ask you a question? What? If someone offers another person a gift, but they do not accept it, to whom then does the gift belong? Well, this actually got the angry man to think for a moment or two. And he said, well, I suppose it would belong to the person who offered the gift. Exactly so, said the Buddha. You have offered me the gift of your anger, but I do not accept it. And so the anger remains with you. Does that feel powerful?
Yeah.
I mean, to remember that whatever that person is giving you, they're offering you. It's a gift. And you, oh no, thank you, we have a no gift policy. And then who the gift belongs to. Let me just leave you with a couple of other thoughts. So in the present climate, we do hear some conversation about people saying, well, but they're just so wrong and I need to tell them they're wrong. And we get this kind of intolerance in public debate. And I need to hasten to say all sides are guilty of this kind of intolerance, though sometimes not aware of it. So I was thinking about that and doing some research on this. And I found this wonderful quote from Voltaire, pre-social media, that I want to share with you. The supposed right of intolerance, they're just wrong and so I don't have to tolerate it, is absurd and barbaric. It is the right of a tiger, nay, it is far worse. For tigers do but tear in order to have food, while we rend each other for paragraphs or tweets. Don't have a right. There's no right of rejecting somebody's opinion, however we may feel about it. And when we get frustrated because you're trying to do the right thing, you're trying to help the community be healthier and better and solve our problems, and nobody seems to get it, remember what Desmond Tutu said, don't raise your voice, improve your argument. If you're interested in seeing more of what I do, there's my blog or my Twitter feed, and you are welcome to follow me there, and thank you for your time this afternoon.
Paine was
I'm leaving you with one last poll question. I won't leave it on the screen, but if you are willing, take a moment to go back to that poll site and just give me something you're taking away from this session. This is my spontaneous evaluation method that allows me to improve my work, so I appreciate any feedback you want to share. And again, it's anonymous, so don't worry. I'm not going to personalize it. Thank you.
nice chatting. So I thought those were really good too. And it was interesting. In the present moment, you can see yourself here before personalized things. I think all those things are good. From a civil discourse standpoint, prevalent right now. If a person, and I don't mean this as Republican or Democrat, but liberal or conservative, in fact, it frustrates me when it gets put in those categories. But if like a person with the biggest megaphone on the planet is, we talked about the HADOC thing all the time, it's destroy your enemy. If that person is in